Welcome to Coyote's Corner. This episode we'll be listening to Michael Lang tell an Irish story, The Birth of Cu Chulain.
In the days of old, Conchobar MacNessa, king of Ulster, held his court at the fortress of Emain Macha. His lands spread from the rolling hills and the northern forests down to the shoreline of the Emerald Isle. His people were protected by the warriors of the Red Branch. But one day, in the early months of winter, a flock of giant birds came to the land of Ulster. They perched upon the roofs of storehouses and granaries, devouring the food that had been set away for winter. When Conchobar heard of this, he sprang from his throne in anger, calling out to his daughter Detain. "You sent for me, father?" "Aye. Ready my chariot. Rally the nobles, the men-at-arms. We shall hunt these birds, and chase them from the land of Ulster." "Aye, father, at once." Detain bowed dutifully to her father, then went to prepare his chariot. The nobles were all rallied, the men-at-arms were summoned, weapons were gathered from the halls of Tetebrek, horses were hitched to their chariots, provisions were gathered and packed. When all was ready, they rolled out from the gates of Emain Macha, and in the lead was the king's chariot, driven by Detain. They were slowed by the heavy snow. When the first of the giant birds came into sight, arrows were knocked upon bowstrings and sent up into the heavens. The birds descended upon the Ulster warriors. But they fought back with swords and axes. Ferris MacRoy, mightiest of all Conchobar's warriors, brought down 3 birds with a single swing. The birds swooped back into the sky and began to fly away, but Conchobar was not satisfied. "Follow my warriors. We shall chase them from Ulster." So, with the king in the lead and all his warriors following behind, they chased the birds over the hills and through the forests. But as day wore into night, a fierce wind began to blow, and the snow began to fall. Ferris turned to his king. "My lord, we'll catch our death in this." "Aye," Conchobar agreed. "Must look for shelter." The hunt was abandoned. Conchobar and all his warriors began searching for a place to weather the storm. Darkness was spreading across the land, but Detain caught sight of a light. "There, father, atop that hill, do you see the light?" "Aye, daughter, I see it well." The Ulster warriors made their way through the snow and the darkness, up the slope of the hill till they came to a large cottage and a barn. Conchobar's poet, Amerigan MacEsset, was sent to knock upon the door, and when the door opened, there stood a young farmer and his wife, round with child. Amerigan bowed low, speaking in words sweeter than honey, as he requested that the king and his men be given shelter for the night. The request was happily granted. The horses were unhitched from their chariots and brought to the barn where they were stabled for the night. Provisions were unpacked and brought into the house. The king and his men gathered round the table beside a warm, crackling fire. As the king and his men ate and drank, Amerigan played his harp. Detain raised up her voice, adding words to the melodies he played. When Ferris raised up his glass and sang as well, the entire house was filled with music and laughter. In the midst of that celebration, the farmer's wife was heard to cry in pain, the child is coming tonight." The farmer ran to his wife's side. The nobles all looked to their king, and Conchobar looked to his daughter. "Detain, can you be of aid to our host this night?" "Aye, father, I can. But I'll need help. Ferris, go in search of firewood. We'll not tolerate any cold in this house this night." Without a word, Ferris arose from his place at the table. He clapped 3 stout men-at-arms upon the shoulder, and together they went out into the storm. They returned a short while later, their arms loaded with firewood. They stoked the flames into a mighty blaze. The farmer's wife was made comfortable, while Detain served as midwife. Whenever Detain needed anything, she had but to simply point at one of the nobles and ask, and they would fetch whatever it was she required. When the child arrived, his first cries were soothed by a melody from Amerigan's harp. The baby boy was placed in his mother's arms, and he was named Sitanta, a strong name, a name suitable for a boy born in the presence of a king. It was then that Ferris was sent once more into the cold to gather firewood, for he returned moments later. "You won't be believing what I've seen. The lady of the house is not the only one been labouring this night. I've just been to the barn to check on the horses. There be 2 newborn colts out there." Upon hearing this happy news, Concobar raised up his glass, drinking a health to their host and all the blessings that had befallen the house. The celebration went on late into the night, but when morning dawned, Concobar awoke on the slope of the hill. There was nothing beneath him but grass and wildflowers. He looked down the slope and saw in the forest freshly fallen snow. He looked around. There were his nobles, his men-at-arms, all sleeping still, all their horses. But there was no sign of a house or a barn. He looked around once more, and there, in his daughter's arms, was a newborn child, and amongst the sleeping horses, 2 newborn colts. Ferris awoke with a yawn. "What has happened? How did we get here?" "We've been here all night, Ferris. This be the work of the fairy folk. This be a place of magic." "Concobar, my king, what of the child? Where did he come from, and the colts?" "We may never know, Ferris. That we may never know." Dutain decided that she would raise Sitanta as her own. "But what of the father?" asked a nobleman. "The child ought to have a father." Concobar smiled at this. "I shall be father to this child." At that the nobles laughed. "Concobar, you are the grandfather to this child. You cannot be his father as well." "Then who shall be the father?" At that the nobles began to argue, each thinking that he ought to be the father to this child. At last Concobar shouted over all of them, "By Lo's bloody sword, be quiet!" Dutain was the one who helped bring this child into the world, so it is right for her to be mother to it. Which of us should be father? Look around, my nobles. Each of us is a great man in his own right, each bringing something to Ulster. And so, I say that each of us shall give something to this child. I, as king, shall watch over this child the way I watch over all of Ulster. But you, Ferris McRoy, mightiest of my warriors, you shall protect this child, and you shall teach him the ways of war, the ways of battle. Amergin McEsset, it was you who played your harp when this child was born, and so you shall teach him the ways of music, rhyme and verse. Teach him the stories of our people. Teach him our history. Teach him all the written works there are. One by one, each of the nobles was told what he would teach the child, and so it was that Sitanta was brought back to the fortress of Imain Macha. He was raised by all the nobles, and learned well all the things they taught. And in time, Sitanta became strong and swift and clever. He soon outgrew his boyhood name, and became known as Cu Chulain. But that is a story for another day.
That was Michael Lang telling The Birth of Cu Chulain. I'm sitting down with Mike to get a little background on that story and see where it came from. Thank you, Mike.
Absolutely, Toby.
So, The Birth of Cu Chulain, where did this story come from?
The story is part of the Ulster Cycle, which comes from Old Irish mythology in the Ulster region, which in modern day that would be the County Down of Northern Ireland and some of the surrounding counties. All this region was once the Kingdom of Ulster.
So the birth of Cu Chulain, the story outlines, the events leading up to the birth, and even raising the child.
Yeah,
and then it
bit.
kind of ends. What happens after this? This seems kind of to leave us wanting a little bit more.
Well, that's the idea. The hope is that in a few episodes we'll do the next part of the story, which I allude to at the end of how he's named Sitanta and will eventually grow into the name of Cu Chulain. And that is the next story, is how he gets that name.
Okay. What drew you to this episodic style of telling?
Well, originally I was trying to find a story from the old Irish sagas in honor of St. Patrick's Day. I wanted to go back, the classic stories of St. Patrick's Day are leprechauns and things like that, and I wanted to go back a little bit further into this rich mythology that, to be honest, I don't know a lot of. I know of the characters and some of the stories, but I don't really know them. And so I wanted to do a little bit of research and came upon this story. And started reading a couple different versions of it and thought this is really interesting. And the more I read about it, the more I realized that there's a lot more here to tell. And there's this whole mythical cycle around this group of characters from Ulster and the court of Emain Macha with Concobar and all his warriors. They're almost like a Knights of the Round Table sort of mythic cycle.
Okay. This mode of storytelling, in conversations we've had about this is almost a more traditional way of telling it in this episodic fashion. Could you go into that a little bit?
Yeah, the bards and the skalds of old, and the Norse and the Irish and all these other old cultures, it was very common to have these great feasts, and the minstrels and the poets would tell these stories, and you'd kind of start the night with a story and then go into the eating and the drinking and the celebrating, and as the first round of dishes was cleared away, there'd be another story and maybe another, and then back to the eating, back to the celebrating and drinking, and then another story. As each course is taken away, there's that time to be filled and bring on the next storyteller to continue the tale. And over the course of an entire evening, 6-8 hours, the entire story would be told. In some other cultures, it was common for the traveling storyteller who would come into town and tell a story or two, but leave you hanging and wanting more. No, tell us more. Ah, well, if I'm going to be here and tell more, then someone has to buy me dinner. I'll be here tomorrow night. When I come back to town again, I'll tell you more of that story. And it was a way to kind of give the storyteller a means of making a living by just traveling around and telling the same story.
Okay. Well, I know I'm looking forward to hearing the rest, and I'm sure our listeners are as well.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
I'm looking forward to telling the next bit of it.
Excellent. Well, this has been another episode of Coyote's Corner. Make sure to check out Mike's website at coyotesinc.com. We've got a bunch of other recordings that we've done there. You can find out his booking schedule, figure out how to book him for your own events and educational venues.
Don't forget to like, favorite, and share all your friends so you always know what's going on here at Coyote's Corner.
Until next time, this has been the Coyote's Corner.
Welcome to Coyote's Corner. You sent for my father. Aye. Ready my chariot, and rally the other guys who ride around with me. Aye, father, right away. In the days of old. Not to be confused with the days of thunder, or the days of our lives. They were, in fact, the days of old. It was decided that this was very strange. But seriously, why can I not figure out what to say here? Oh, maybe that's why. Concobar was not satisfied. We'll chase these birds from whatever country this is that I rule. Ulster? Is that my country? Yes, Your Majesty. You rule over Ulster. Right. We'll chase these birds from the lands of Ulster. I'm trying to remember this other dude's name. I will get it. The king's poet. American, because there's no other vowel before that G. The king's poet. American McEat. There's definitely another consonant in there. Esset. That's his name. God. Yeah, you think it's easy? Come over here and pronounce these frickin' names, alright? And more stuff happened. There is more to this story. We are most of the way through this story, so feel free to get up and get some popcorn if you need. This is a good time for intermission. We'll be back in a few minutes with the rest of this story, as soon as I figure it out.